This is the story of how an invisible wife executed the perfect corporate and social coup. Before we dive into the details, smash that like button if you believe being underestimated is the ultimate superpower. And once the story is done, tell us in the comments what your final rating is. 0 to 10. Subscribe and turn on notifications so you don't miss our next story of ultimate justice. Part 1. The City, the Titan, and the Trust. In the upper echelons of London society, they called her Audrey Sterling, the beige spectre of Knightsbridge. While her multi-billionaire husband, Vincent Thorne, dominated every high-profile event in the capital, she was the quiet shadow, the understated figure who trailed him. His mistress, a flashy social media influencer named Nova, saw Audrey as a joke, a relic worthy of ridicule at her exclusive champagne brunches. But they forgot one thing. Spectres keep secrets. And at the biggest charity gala of the year, in front of the world's press, they were about to discover that Audrey wasn't a spectre. She was the one holding the hammer, and she was about to bring the entire facade crashing down. Audrey Sterling Thorne was a creature of beige tones. Not the warm beige of a sun-drenched Cornwall beach, but the cool, discreet beige of a medical waiting room. Her life, from the outside, appeared to have been custom-designed in that one unforgettable color. She lived in a vast 20,000-square-foot limestone penthouse overlooking Hyde Park, but inhabited it like a hermit crab occupying a shell it found, not one it built. Her uniform consisted of Brunello Cucinelli cashmere cardigans, sensible Tod's loafers, and pearl studs, the kind her grandmother wore. Her husband, Vincent Thorne, was her polar opposite. He was a creature of chrome, glass, and booming sounds. Vincent was a new money titan, a private equity shark who had built a $14 billion empire. Thorne Capital, seemingly out of thin air. He was loud, charismatic, and obsessively concerned with his public image. He graced the cover of Forbes Europe. He was the subject of fawning profiles in the Financial Times. And he was the man every gala in London wanted as their guest of honor. He had married Audrey Sterling 10 years earlier. Back then, he was only an ambitious young partner at a small firm. She was the quiet, intellectual daughter of the Sterling family, whose lineage was so old they had stopped trying to impress anyone decades ago. The Sterling fortune was deep, silent, and tied up in land, art, and impregnable trusts. Vincent saw Audrey as his key. She was his access to a world that would never have otherwise recognized him. And for 10 years, she had been the perfect, innocuous accessory, the beige wife. Lately, however, the accessory had been tarnished, or rather, superseded. Nova Reyes was the supersession. She was everything Audrey was not: loud, artificial, and aggressively visible. A 24-year-old influencer with 30 million followers, Nova was a walking neon billboard for Vincent's midlife crisis. She wore Balmain so tight it looked painted on. She carried neon pink crocodile Birkin bags and documented every lavish gift Vincent bought her. Vincent didn't even try to hide it. In fact, he was proud. He saw Nova as another acquisition, a testament to his power. He viewed Audrey, with her quiet reading and her useless charity board meetings, as a piece of antique furniture he was obligated to keep. On this particular Tuesday morning, the tension in the penthouse was palpable. The annual Thorne Foundation Gala was due in 3 days. It was the peak of the London social calendar, held this year at the opulent Royal Opera House Ballroom. It was, in Vincent's mind, his coronation. "Audrey, for God's sake!" he roared, striding into the breakfast nook. He was already dressed in a sharp, bespoke Tom Ford suit, smelling of expensive cologne. Audrey was sipping a cup of tea, reading a thick, leather-bound volume. She looked up, her expression placid. "Good morning, Vincent. I just spoke to my PR team," he said, tearing a piece of croissant in half, his movements agitated. "They're asking about your dress for the gala. Please tell me you are not wearing that gray thing you wore to the opera last month." "It was charcoal," she said smoothly. "And it was a classic Lanvin. It was a shroud, Audrey. A shroud. This is the Royal Opera House. We have the Vogue UK team confirmed. We have reporters from the Times. I need you to look like a billionaire's wife, not a village librarian. You can call Nova's stylist. She can get you something impactful." The mention of the name was a deliberate, casual cruelty. Audrey's fingers tightened fractionally on her teacup. "Nova's stylist? Lachlan," she repeated, her voice perfectly even. "Yes, look at her." He gestured impatiently to his phone, which was always open to Nova's Instagram feed. "She knows how to make an entrance. She looks like money. You look comfortable, I see." Audrey closed her book. "I will ensure my outfit is appropriate for the evening, Vincent." "Don't give me that appropriate nonsense. That's what you always say," he scoffed, grabbing his brief. "And then you turn up looking like my accountant. Just try, Audrey. Try to look like you're married to me." He slammed out the door before she could reply. Audrey sat in silence for a full minute. The beige of her cardigan seemed to absorb the light in the room. Then, she picked up her own phone. She did not call a stylist. She called a number listed in her contacts under a single initial. M. "Marcus Torres speaking," a crisp, professional voice answered. "Marcus," Audrey said, her voice dropping, losing its placid, wifely tone, and being replaced by something cold and steel-sharp. "He just confirmed the Vogue team. The timeline is accelerating. I want the final audit on my desk before 4 and notify the Times. Tell them the source is confirmed and the story is greenlit. It's time to pull the trigger." "And the gala?" Marcus asked. A small, dangerous smile touched Audrey's lips. "Oh, the gala is still the main event. Tell our friends at the Financial Conduct Authority, FCA, their invitations are at the door. And call Paris. Tell Valerius. It's time." Part 2. The Baltazar Betrayal. The official start to the gala festivities was an exclusive small lunch for donors, held 2 days before the main event. It took place at Baltazar, the iconic brasserie in Covent Garden. The restaurant hummed with the sound of old guard chatter and new money deal-making. This was not a location for the press. It was a closed-door meeting of the 50 most powerful philanthropists in the city, the real whales, whose checks kept museums and hospitals running. Audrey arrived alone. She wore a fawn-colored pleated Loro Piana skirt and a cream silk blouse. Her only jewelry was her plain gold wedding band and the small pearl studs. Her hair was swept up in a simple, elegant chignon. She was, as always, impeccable, understated, and utterly invisible, blending into the polished wood and warm lighting of the restaurant. Vincent was already there, holding court at the central table. In a stunning breach of protocol, Nova Reyes was seated beside him. The room, filled with people like the Duke of Westminster and other technology titans, registered Nova's presence with a subtle, collective contraction of expressions. She did not belong. This was not an influencer party. It was a gathering of principals. Nova, of course, was oblivious. She wore a skin-tight, fire-engine-red Balmain mini-dress, studded with enormous gold buttons. A huge serpentine necklace, encrusted with borrowed diamonds, a recent gift from Vincent, coiled around her throat. She looked less like a guest and more like an extremely expensive party favor. As Audrey approached, a silence fell over the immediate area. Vincent, seeing her, had the decency to look momentarily flustered. "Audrey, you made it!" "Made, Vincent." She inclined her head, her gaze serene. She did not look at Nova, Nova, however, was staring at her. Her expertly lined eyes skimmed over Audrey's attire with blatant scorn. "Oh my God," Nova whispered, loud enough for the entire table to hear. She leaned into Vincent, her voice a theatrical stage whisper. "Richie, darling, is she serious?" Vincent flushed. "Nova, stop it. No, seriously, what is that? A teacher's uniform." Nova let out a sharp, tinkling giggle that grated on the nerves. "Audrey, sweetheart," she said, finally addressing her directly, her tone dripping with fake pity. "I didn't realize they let the staff sit with the guests." Audrey paused and slowly turned her head to look at Nova. The ambient noise of the restaurant seemed to fade. "Pardon me?" Audrey asked. Her voice quiet but audible. "Your clothes," Nova said, emboldened by Audrey's lack of an immediate angry reaction. She waved a hand, laden with diamond rings, toward Audrey's outfit. "That beige thing. My grandmother wouldn't even garden in that. Richie, you really need to give your wife a better clothing allowance. It's just embarrassing for you." The table was frozen. Some of the older matriarchs looked utterly horrified at the audacity. This wasn't just rudeness. It was a social declaration of war. Audrey looked at Vincent. This was his moment. His wife had just been publicly and cruelly insulted by his mistress in front of his most important peers. Vincent shifted in his seat. He saw the expectant, cold stares of the other donors. He saw Nova, pouting and defiant. He saw Audrey, waiting. He was trapped. And like a coward, he chose the path of least resistance. He let out a short, forced laugh. "Nova, you are terrible," he said, giving her a light squeeze on the arm. Then he turned back to Audrey. "Audrey, you know what she's like. Just come sit down. Let's have some wine." He hadn't defended her. In fact, he had sided with the mistress. He had tacitly agreed with the assessment. "You are embarrassing me." Audrey's expression didn't change. But inside, the last thin thread of feeling she may have held for the man she once loved snapped. The steel in her spine solidified into titanium. "No, thank you, Vincent," she said. Her voice was clear, crisp, and cut through the silence. "I've suddenly lost my appetite." She looked at Nova. It was the first time she had truly looked at the younger woman. It wasn't a look of anger or jealousy. It was a look of evaluation. Like a scientist observing a particularly simple, brightly colored microbe under a microscope. "That is a very loud dress, Miss Reyes," Audrey said, her voice dangerously soft. "It is always interesting to see what people choose to wear when they are so desperate for a seat at the table. They often forget that price is not the same as cost." Nova's smile wavered, confused by the cryptic insult. Audrey then turned to Vincent. "Enjoy your lunch, Vincent." She turned and walked out of Baltazar. She did not rush. Her steps were silent on the tiled floor. All eyes followed her. The beige specter had just exited the building, and the temperature of the room had dropped 20 degrees. Vincent Thorne was left spluttering and blustering, his power at the table utterly shattered. He had been made to look weak, cruel, and foolish on both his mistress and his wife. Part 3. The war room. Audrey did not return home to the penthouse. She didn't go to a spa or her mother's house to cry. Her chauffeur-driven car, a discreet black Audi A8, not the flashy Rolls-Royce Vincent preferred, slid through central London and stopped in front of a glass and steel skyscraper. She entered a private lobby, bypassing security with a simple nod, and took an elevator to the 54th floor. The doors opened to a space that was the antithesis of her public persona. This was the headquarters of the Sterling family office, the nerve center of her ancestral fortune. It wasn't a dusty, wood-paneled relic. It was a hyper-modern war room, floor-to-ceiling glass, a central command table with holographic data projections, and a silent, focused team of analysts lawyers, and forensic accountants. Marcus Torres, her family's principal counsel, was waiting. He was a tall, severe man in a Savile Row suit. "Mrs. Thorne," he said, his tone one of deep respect. "I'm early. Vincent brought Miss Reyes to the donor lunch," Audrey said, shrugging off the beige cardigan and hanging it on a coat rack. Beneath it, she wore a sleek, sleeveless silk blouse. She was no longer the wife. She was the CEO. Marcus raised a single, disapproving eyebrow. A tactical error on his part. "A catalyst," Audrey corrected, walking to the head of the table. A young female analyst immediately handed her a tablet. "How are we looking on Thorne Capital?" "He's been careless," the analyst, a woman named Sarah, replied. "He became arrogant. He's been using the Thorne Foundation, your foundation, I might add, as his personal piggy bank. He's leveraging its assets to cover high-risk derivatives in his personal fund. And the shell companies? We've penetrated them." "The 7, Audrey stated. "He's been diverting funds from the foundation to buy assets. A flat in Monaco, a McLaren P1, a significant amount of Graf jewelry, Nova's gifts," Sarah confirmed. "It wasn't a question." "Exactly," Marcus confirmed. "He is not just an adulterer, Audrey. He's an embezzler. He's been stealing from his own charity. Your charity." Audrey looked at the data scrolling across the screen. The numbers were staggering. Vincent hadn't just built his $14 billion empire. He had inflated it, illegally and immorally, using the bedrock of the sterling endowment she had entrusted to him when they married. He thought her old money was foolish and passive. He had mistaken her patience for ignorance. "When we married," Audrey said, her voice distant, "my father warned me. He said men desperate for money will never understand people who have it. Vincent doesn't see this as a foundation. He sees it as a safe deposit box, and he's been robbing it blind. He's vulnerable," Marcus said. "The moment this goes public, his lines of credit will vaporize. Thorne Capital is a house of cards. Its $14 billion valuation is based on assets he doesn't technically own. They're leveraged against your trust." "Good." Audrey's gaze was hard. "The gala is tomorrow night. The Times runs the story at 8 p.m. The FCA investigators arrive at 8:15 p.m. The Foundation Board receives an emergency packet at 8:20 p.m., along with my motion to remove Vincent as chairman and install myself as interim head. With immediate effect, it's an execution," Sarah, the analyst, murmured in awe. "It's a correction," Audrey said. "He built his name on my money and my family's reputation. He is about to learn what it means to lose both." She turned to Marcus. "And the other matter?" Marcus smiled for the first time. "It has arrived. It's in the secure room." He led her to a large, climate-controlled vault in the back of the office. In the center of the room, on a velvet-draped mannequin, stood a gown. But gown was the wrong word. It was a piece of architecture. It was a masterpiece. It was the final piece by Valerius, the enigmatic, reclusive Parisian couturier who hadn't taken a new client in over a decade. He was a legend, designing only for royalty and generational icons. Getting a Valerius was harder than gaining a private audience with the Pope. For the Sterling family, however, he was an old friend. The dress was made of a material that seemed to absorb the light in the room. It was an impossible, deep sapphire blue, like the heart of a glacier. The structure was severe and majestic, a sharp, sculpted bodice that flared into a dramatic skirt that trailed on the floor. It was not adorned with sequins or feathers. Its power lay in its cut, its shape, its pure, undeniable presence. "And the accessories," Marcus said, gesturing to a smaller case. Inside, on a bed of black velvet, lay the sterling necklace. It was a river of inherited, ice-white diamonds, culminating in the legendary sterling star, a flawless 100-carat blue diamond. It hadn't been seen in public since Audrey's great-grandmother wore it to King George V's coronation. Nova Reyes, with her borrowed Graf diamonds, was a child playing dress-up. This was power. "He wanted me to look like a billionaire's wife," Audrey said, touching the cool surface of the diamond. "He's about to be reminded what a founder's wife looks like." She would not arrive as Audrey Thorne, the beige wife. She would arrive as Audrey Sterling, the woman who owned the board, the bank, and the man who had just humiliated her. Haute couture wasn't just a dress. It was her armor. It was her weapon. It was her declaration of victory. Part 4. The coup at the Opera House. The grand hall of the Royal Opera House was a sea of glittering ostentation. The ancient Egyptian temple of Debod, lit with dramatic blue and gold light, served as a majestic, silent witness to the spectacle. This was the night Vincent Thorne had been planning for a year. It was his ascension, the moment he moved from new money shark to old guard philanthropist. He arrived on the red carpet at 7:30 p.m. sharp, stepping out of a cherry-red Bugatti. The flashbulbs erupted in a blinding epileptic strobe, and on his arm was Nova Reyes. If her lunch outfit was a statement, this was a proclamation. She wore a bespoke gown by a notoriously garish designer, one known more for spectacle than taste. It was almost entirely transparent, a cobweb of Swarovski crystals and flesh-toned mesh that left absolutely nothing to the imagination. It was, by any standard, scandalously inappropriate for a charity gala at the Opera House. But it was, undeniably, an entrance. "Vincent! Vincent! Who are you wearing? Nova, you look incredible. Give us a spin." Nova was loving it. She posed, pouted, and blew kisses, her body glittering like a human disco ball. The borrowed diamonds around her neck, the very ones Audrey's team had flagged, flashed white and hot under the lights. Vincent smirked, his chest puffed out. He loved it, loved the attention, the envy, the sheer audacity. He was the man who had everything, and he wasn't afraid to flaunt it. A reporter from ITV News thrust a microphone in his face. "Vincent, you're the man of the moment. But we have to ask, where is your wife, Audrey?" Vincent's smile tightened, just a fraction. He leaned into the mic, adopting a tone of magnanimous marital concern. "Audrey, unfortunately, isn't quite feeling up to it tonight. She sends her apologies. She prefers, well, you know Audrey. She's a very private person. All this is a bit much for her." Nova let out a small, sympathetic, "Oh," and patted his chest. The implication was clear. The insignificant wife was home, probably in her beige cardigan, while the real woman was by his side. Inside, the party was in full swing. Champagne flowed. An orchestra played. Vincent and Nova made their grand entrance down the staircase, prompting gasps and whispers. The older museum trustees looked horrified. The young tech bros looked impressed. At 8 p.m., Vincent took to the stage to a thundering round of applause. The spotlight hit him. Thank you," he boomed. "Welcome, all of you, to my vision. The Thorne Foundation is more than a name. It's a promise that we, the new leaders of the world, will shape the future." He began his speech, a long, self-congratulatory monologue about his brilliance, his foresight, and his generosity. Nova watched from the main table, her face a mask of pure adoration, filming him for her Instagram story. At 8:01 p.m., across every newsroom in the city, an embargo was lifted. The Times front page went live. The Thorne Empire, billionaire Vincent Thorne, accused of massive embezzlement from his own foundation. By 8:05 p.m., as Vincent pontificated about fiscal responsibility, the personal phones of every CEO, investor, and board member in that room began to buzz, vibrate, and chime. One by one, faces began to fall. People looked up from their screens, eyes wide with shock, and stared at the man on stage. Vincent, blinded by the spotlight, didn't notice. And this is why I am proud to pledge another £50 million tonight. The applause was scattered, terrified. People whispered, huddled, and showed each other their phones. The orchestra, sensing the shift in the room, began to play uneasily. Vincent frowned, confused by the sudden chilliness of the reception. "Thank you," he said, stepping down from the stage, his confidence faltering. His PR agent, a woman pale with panic, ran up to him. "Vincent, you have to see this. The Times." What is it?" he snapped. But before she could answer, a new commotion started. It began at the museum entrance, a sound from the red carpet outside, the sound of yelling. Not the excited yells for a celebrity, but the frantic, hungry screams of a press pack that has smelled blood. The paparazzi who had been drifting suddenly surged back to the barricades. "What is going on?" Nova demanded, annoyed that the attention was no longer on her. At 8:15 p.m., the massive doors to the grand hall, which had been closed after the guests were seated, swung open. And in the threshold, framed by the light of the hall, stood Audrey. Silence. It wasn't a gradual silence. It was a sudden, violent vacuum of sound, as if all the air had been sucked out of the Temple of Dibod. The orchestra music died with a discordant squeak of violins. Vincent Thorne, who had been staring at his publicist's trembling hands, looked up, and he froze. His skin went from flushed to ashen in less than a second. The champagne glass in his hand, which he had just picked up, didn't slip. It shattered. The sound of glass hitting the marble floor was like a gunshot in the silent room. It wasn't Audrey. It was a vision. It was a queen. The woman in the threshold was not the beige specter. She was a celestial event. The Valerius gown, that impossible shade of sapphire blue, seemed to emanate its own light. It was structured like a piece of divine armor, its lines clean, powerful, and utterly uncompromising. And around her neck, blazing with a cool, blue-white fire that eclipsed all other jewels in the room, was the sterling star. It rested on her collarbone like a royal seal, a declaration of a power so deep and ancient that it made Vincent's new money ostentation look like a child's game of dress-up. She was not alone. Flanking her were two severe-looking men in impeccably cut dark suits. One was Marcus Torres. The other, Vincent recognized with a jolt of pure, chilling terror, was Adrian Price, the most feared federal prosecutor from the Crown Prosecution Service. And behind them, cameras flashed. But these weren't the ITV paparazzi. These were the real press. The Times, the World, Bloomberg, and leading them, a Vogue team. But not for the society pages. This was their news division, led by a formidable editor who looked ready to document a public execution. Audrey Sterling took a step into the room. Vincent couldn't breathe. He was paralyzed. This wasn't just a new look. This wasn't a revenge dress. This was a coup d'etat. The woman he had dismissed as a librarian, as a beige shroud, was wearing a gown that likely cost more than his Bugatti, and a necklace that was, quite literally, priceless. But more than that, she wore an expression of absolute Arctic control. Nova, beside him, was the first to speak, her voice a high, confused screech. "What is that? What is she wearing? Who is that?" She genuinely, for a second, didn't recognize her. Audrey began to walk. Her steps were silent, but they echoed in the cavernous room. She didn't look at Vincent. She didn't look at Nova. Her gaze was fixed on the museum director and the powerful old chairman of the board, who were seated at the main table, their faces masks of stunned comprehension. "Mr. Thorne! The shout came from the Times reporter, who had pushed his way into the room. The cameras were rolling, flashes erupting. "Mr. Thorne, can you comment on the FCA filing alleging you embezzled over £90 million from the Foundation endowment?" Vincent's blood turned to ice. "FCA, embezzled." "Mr. Thorne!" another reporter yelled. "Is it true that your primary credit facility at Barclays has just been frozen? Is Thorne Capital insolvent?" Vincent stumbled backward, as if physically struck. He looked at Audrey. She was halfway across the room now, moving with the unhurried grace of a panther. "Audrey!" he choked out. "Audrey, what is this? What have you done?" She finally stopped. She turned her head and looked at him. For the first time all night, she looked directly at her husband. There was no anger in her eyes. There was no pain. There was nothing. It was the distant pity one would afford a fly caught in amber. "Done, Vincent?" she asked, her voice, though quiet, amplified by the stunned silence. "I haven't done anything. I am simply correcting an administrative error. You see, you've been spending my money, and I'm here to collect." The shock that paralyzed Vincent Thorne was not just awe. It was the systemic failure of a man realizing, in a blinding instant, that he was not the predator, but the prey. He had been played. For years he had been played. His whole life, his $14 billion valuation, his reputation, his place in this very room. It was all a performance, and the woman he thought was the stage manager was, in fact, the owner of the theater, the play, and the lights. And she had just pulled the plug on everything. "No, you can't," he stammered, his mind racing, trying to find a move, an angle. "The board, our assets, they're locked up. They're mine." "Were they yours, Vincent?" Marcus Torres said, stepping forward. He handed a single leather-bound folder, not to Vincent, but to the stunned chairman of the museum. "The Thorne Foundation Board of Trustees has been provided with a 300-page forensic audit. Mr. Thorne has been funding his high-risk ventures and his lifestyle by illegally leveraging the Foundation's core assets. Assets which, under the original 1940 Sterling Family Trust, are non-negotiable and cannot be used as collateral." You witch?" Vincent whispered, his face crumbling. "You set me up." "You set yourself up, Vincent," Audrey said coldly. "You simply became careless. You assumed I was too stupid, or too placid, or too beige to notice." She then turned her attention, and the attention of the entire room, to the woman still clutching Vincent's arm. Nova was trembling. The Vogue camera was no longer pointed at Audrey's gown, but at Nova's face. "Miss Reyes," Audrey said, her voice reverting to that same dangerously polite tone she had used at Baltazar. "That is a remarkable necklace you are wearing." Nova's hand went instinctively to the Graf diamond serpent. It was a gift," she stammered. "Yes, it was," Audrey said. "A gift purchased on September 14th from a shell company, Reyes Holdings SL, which was funded directly from an account earmarked for the Foundation's pediatric oncology wing." The gasp in the room was sharp and collective. Nova went white. "And the dress," Audrey continued, pointing at the near-naked creation. "Stunning. Also purchased by the same shell company. The flat in Monaco, the McLaren, everything." The prosecutor, Adrian Price, who had been silent until now, finally spoke. "Miss Reyes," he said, his voice ringing with authority, "you are in possession of stolen goods, goods obtained from laundered and embezzled funds. You will be asked to accompany us to answer some questions." Two uniformed Metropolitan Police officers, who had quietly entered behind the press, began to move toward her. Nova shrieked. It was a high, terrified sound, like a rabbit caught in a snare. "No, Richie! Tell them it's not true, Richie!" She grabbed Vincent's arm, but he was a statue. He was broken. He didn't even look at her. He was staring at the exit, his empire, his life, dissolving in the flash of 1,000 cameras. "Get off! Get off me!" he finally roared, pushing her away. He turned on Audrey, his face a mask of purple fury. "You did this! You—" He never made it. The two dark-suited men who had flanked Audrey, not lawyers, but her private Hayes office security detail, moved with fluid speed. They intercepted Vincent before he was 5 feet from her, subduing him and pinning his arms behind his back with one brutal, efficient movement. "Vincent Thorne," Adrian Price said, "you are under arrest on suspicion of wire fraud, mail fraud, and embezzlement." The cameras went insane. The flashes were a solid wall of white light. Vincent Thorne, the billionaire king of London, was being held, struggling and pathetic, in his own tuxedo at his own gala. Nova Reyes was sobbing, her makeup running in black rivers down her face. "I didn't know," she whimpered as the officers took her arm. "I didn't know. He just gave them to me." Her dress, which was meant to be the pinnacle of sex and power, now just looked cheap and tragic. It was the uniform of a thief. As Vincent was escorted out, a broken, screaming shell of a man, his eyes met Audrey's one last time. She did not smile. She did not gloat. She simply watched him go. She watched the man who had laughed at her, dismissed her, and stolen from her, being dragged out of his party, in her museum, his life in ruins. And then she turned to the room. Conclusion and call to action. The silence that followed Vincent and Nova's departure was not merely an absence of sound. It was a physical weight. It was the sound of a billion-pound empire, a social hierarchy, and 2 human lives imploding in real time. The 400 remaining guests, the power brokers of finance, media, and politics, were frozen. Some stared at the grand doors where the screaming, sobbing Nova and the stunned, roaring Vincent had been dragged out. Others stared at Audrey. The phones that had been buzzing with the Times alert were now clutched in white-knuckled hands. The young tech titans who had adored Vincent's aggressive, innovative spirit looked pale. If Vincent Thorne's £14 billion valuation could evaporate in 10 minutes, what did that say about their own? The investors who held stakes in Thorne whispered frantically to their wives, their faces ashen. And then there were the matriarchs, the grandes dames of the old guard of Knightsbridge, women with names like Rothschild, Astor, and Balfour, who had been forced to tolerate Vincent for a decade. They were not whispering. They were watching Audrey with a look of deep, cold, and terrible satisfaction. They were smiling. Audrey Sterling stood in the center of the room, a pillar of sapphire and diamonds. She was, in every sense of the word, in complete control. She did not rush the podium. She did not look nervous. She turned, her movements as deliberate and unhurried as a queen in her own court, and began to walk toward the stage. The only sound in the Temple of Debod was the near-silent tap-tap-tap of her custom-made satin heels on the marble floor. Reaching the small staircase to the dais, she paused. There, glittering on the floor, were the shattered fragments of the champagne glass Vincent had broken. She looked at the broken glass for one long second. Then, with the grace of a dancer, she lifted the hem of her Valerius gown just enough to step over the mess, not onto the stage. The metaphor was not lost on anyone. She took the microphone from the podium, where Vincent, minutes earlier, had delivered his triumphant, fraudulent speech. She held it, not with a nervous grip, but with a light, easy confidence. "My apologies," she said. Her voice was amplified, clear as a bell, and utterly calm. It did not tremble. It did not break. It was the voice of a CEO addressing a board meeting. "My apologies for that unpleasant incident. It appears we had a major breach tonight, not of security, but of ethics and of trust. A man at a front table, a hedge fund manager named William Sanchez, who was a major investor in Thorn Capital, stood up abruptly, his chair scraping loudly. "Audrey, Miss Sterling, what the hell is going on? What does this mean for Thorn Capital? We have holdings. My fund has £1 billion with him." The room tensed. This was the real question. The social drama was theater. This was money. Audrey turned her cool, Arctic gaze on him. She did not look surprised by the question. She had anticipated it. "Mr. Sanchez," she said, addressing him directly, "thank you for your question. Thorn Capital, as an entity, was, I'm afraid, a fiction. It was a house of cards built upon a single stolen asset, the core endowment of the Sterling Family Trust, which I, as its sole trustee, placed in the care of the Thorn Foundation." She let that sink in. The blood drained from William Sanchez's face. "Mr. Thorn," she continued, "used that capital, illegally, to leverage his personal funds, creating a valuation that was pure fantasy. He was not a billionaire, Mr. Sanchez. He was simply a man with a very, very large and very illegal line of credit. My credit." "As of 8:15 p.m., Audrey announced, "a court-appointed administrator has taken control of the Thorn Capital offices. A federal court order has frozen all accounts linked to Mr. Thorn's name. I am afraid, Mr. Sanchez, that Thorn Capital no longer exists." A collective, horrified gasp emptied the room. It was not just an arrest. It was an annihilation. It was the public execution of an entire enterprise. William Sanchez slumped into his seat, as if his legs had been cut out from under him. Audrey turned to the room at large, her voice softening only a fraction, adopting the tone of a leader reassuring her people after a blow. "The Thorn Foundation is, therefore, also a compromised entity," she said. "But the work we do, the work I have always intended, will not be. Effective immediately, the Foundation will undergo a complete restructuring. It will revert to its original charter, under its original name, the Sterling Family Endowment for the Arts and Sciences." She looked at the museum director, Mr. Hoven, who was standing by his table, looking like he might have a heart attack. "Mr. Hoven," she said, a small, reassuring smile touching her lips, "rest assured that the £50 million pledge Mr. Thorn made this evening is secure." Mr. Hoven let out a massive, audible sigh of relief. "In fact," Audrey continued, "now that the Foundation accounts are no longer compromised by Mr. Thorn's unfortunate lifestyle choices, I am pleased to announce that we will double that pledge to £100 million, effective immediately." This time the sound was a roar. It was stunned. It was grateful. It was reverent. It was the sound of 400 of the world's most powerful people realizing they were not on a sinking ship, but that the captain they thought was in charge had been a pirate. And the quiet, beautiful wife they had all ignored was, in fact, the admiral of the entire fleet. The applause was deafening, a wave of pure, unadulterated relief. Audrey waited for it to subside. Her expression was one of polite, serene command. "My family," she said, her voice dropping to a more personal, powerful register, "has quietly supported this city, this museum, and the arts for over a century. We have always preferred to do so without fanfare. We believed that true philanthropy was anonymous, that the work was more important than the name attached to it. Tonight, the fanfare became necessary." She looked directly into the lens of the Vogue camera, which was still rolling, capturing the most incredible society story of the decade. "For 10 years, I allowed my family name to be obscured by another. I did this in the name of partnership. But partnership requires trust, and trust, like an endowment, is a sacred principle. Once you break it, the interest is forfeited, and the capital is lost." Mr. Thorn mistook discretion for disinterest. He mistook tradition for weakness. He saw beige and assumed it was empty. He forgot. she said, a hint of a smile playing on her lips. That the world's oldest and most valuable scrolls are beige. He forgot that the very foundations of this great museum are beige stone. He forgot that substance endures. She looked at the room. Tonight is not an end. It is a restoration. The sterling endowment is back. Integrity is not a quiet suggestion. It is a requirement. Substance will always outperform spectacle. She paused, and her eyes, for only a microsecond, flicked toward the door where Nova had been dragged out. And true class is never for sale. It is earned, and as you have seen tonight, it is defended. She placed the microphone back on the podium. Now, she said, her voice reverting to that of a gracious hostess. I believe we were promised dessert. Orchestra, please resume. The bar is open. Enjoy the remainder of your evening. For a moment the room was silent. Then, the conductor, looking utterly bewildered but obeying the command, picked up his baton. Hesitantly, a piece of Vivaldi began to play, filling the void. And slowly, then suddenly, the room snapped back to life. But it was a different room. The waiters, who had been hiding backstage, rushed out with decadent desserts. The murmur of conversation began, electric and hushed. The party had fractured. The new money crowd, Vincent's crowd, was huddled near the exits, on their phones, their faces sick. The real power, however, gravitated toward Audrey. A circle of women, the steel matriarchs of the city, moved toward her as she stepped off the stage. Beatrice Astor Lennox, an 80-year-old woman who ruled the city's charity boards, took Audrey's hands. Audrey, darling, Beatrice said, her voice like dry ice. You have done what we all wished we could do. You have thrown out the trash, and you did it without spilling a single drop on the rug. Your grandmother would have been. She would have simply adored it. We were so worried about you, darling, another murmured. That creature he brought to Baltazar, in a red dress, before 5 a.m. Oh, it was an abomination. We are so pleased to have you back. They were not just congratulating her. They were welcoming her. They were closing ranks. The beige specter was gone. In her place stood Audrey Sterling, the new, undisputed queen of their circle, the one who had finally, and publicly, put the vulgar usurpers in their place. As Audrey gracefully accepted their fealty, Marcus Torres and his analyst, Sarah, moved silently through the room. They were not partying. They were distributing small, embossed cards to the stunned, and now deeply relieved Foundation Board members. The cards read, Emergency meeting, 8 a.m., Sterling Tower, 54th floor. The cleanup was already underway. Finally, the formidable editor of Vogue UK, a woman whose severe bob and dark glasses were a global trademark, cut through the crowd. She did not fawn. She approached Audrey as an equal. Audrey, her voice was crisp. That was a moment that will be talked about for a generation. We are, of course, scrapping the best-dressed gala piece. This is the cover, the news cover. Isabella, Audrey replied, inclining her head. I am glad you were here to see it. It is important that the truth is properly documented. The gown, Isabella said, her eyes clinically assessing the sapphire dress. It's a Valerius. He hasn't made a dress in a decade. How? Valerius is my godfather, Audrey said simply. He designed it for my 30th birthday, 10 years ago. He sent it with a note that read, You will know when it is time to wear it. This morning, Audrey said. I knew. Isabella's eyebrows rose above her glasses. This was not a last-minute revenge dress. This was a decade of patience. This was a long, cold, calculated game. And the sterling star, Isabella stated. Unseen since King George V's coronation. I felt it appropriate, Audrey said, touching the enormous blue diamond. A night of a certain kind of coronation, don't you think? A restoration of the correct order of things. Isabella nodded, a small, sharp smile on her face. She understood completely. And Miss Rhea's display? Some people wear clothes to draw attention, Audrey said, her voice devoid of malice. A simple statement of fact. Some people wear clothes to command it, and some people, like Miss Reyes, simply wear their price tag. It is a pity she didn't realize hers was paid by stealing from a children's cancer fund. It makes for a very tacky, very temporary accessory. With that, Audrey gave Isabella a polite nod. She had done what she came to do. She did not stay to bask in the compliments. She did not linger for more champagne. The room was hers. The city was hers. She had made her statement. To the bewilderment of the guests, less than 30 minutes after Vincent's arrest, Audrey Sterling handed her empty water glass to a passing waiter, gave one final gracious nod to the chairman, and left. She walked out alone, back through the center of the hall, her sapphire gown parting the crowds like the Red Sea. The cameras that had been put away scrambled to capture her exit. She did not look at them. She walked out of this grand hall, under the arch, and out into the cool London night. Her discreet black Audi A8 awaited. Not the Bugatti, not the Rolls. She slid into the back seat. Marcus Torres was waiting in the passenger seat. "Well done, Audrey," he said. Audrey leaned her head against the leather. The sterling star was cool against her skin. "The 8 a.m. meeting is confirmed?" she asked. "Everyone will be there," Marcus replied. "Good." The car pulled away silently from the curb, leaving behind the pandemonium of the opera house, the flashing lights, and the ruins of Vincent Thorne's life. "Get me a coffee, will you, Marcus? It's going to be a very long night. We have an endowment to rebuild." The specter was gone. The Queen was on the throne, and the work had already begun. Part 5. The final correction. The consequences were immediate and total. By 9:45 a.m. the following morning, Audrey Sterling was the #1 trending topic in the world. The Times story had been corroborated by the public arrests. Thorne Capital, built on a foundation of lies and leveraged credit, collapsed. It was delisted from the exchange by midday. Vincent Thorne, facing federal charges, was a billionaire in name only. In reality, he was bankrupt. The 14 billion pounds had been a mirage. Nova Reyes was released after questioning, but her career was over. The brands that had sponsored her dropped her within hours. Her Instagram was a toxic wasteland of snake emojis and comments accusing her of stealing from sick children. She was forced to surrender the dress, the necklace, the car, and the flat. The gifts were all evidence. She was last seen at Heathrow, flying coach, back to her small hometown, a pariah. The dress she was mocked for, the tacky, stolen, sheer one, was now her legacy. And Audrey? Audrey Sterling was on the cover of Forbes. Not on the billionaire wives list, but the main cover. Audrey Sterling, the silent hand. Who built and burned an empire. The beige cardigans and sensible loafers were mostly gone. They had been her camouflage, her cloak of invisibility, while she gathered her data and waited for the perfect moment to strike. While Vincent and Nova saw an insignificant, irrelevant wife, she had been a general in a war room, calmly moving her pieces. 6 months later, the penthouse, which had of course always been in the Sterling family trust, had been redecorated. The sterile, cold chrome Vincent had loved was gone, replaced by warm, priceless art and comfortable, elegant furnishings. Audrey was in her new home office, a vast, light-filled room overlooking the park. She was no longer just the head of the endowment. She had taken her rightful place as CEO of Sterling Consolidated, the multi-generational family firm she had been groomed since childhood to lead. Marcus Torres entered, placing a small stack of files on her antique desk. She was wearing a sleek navy Victoria Beckham dress. She looked up and smiled. "Marcus, good news, I hope." "The prosecution is offering Vincent a plea deal," he said. 25 years, reduced to 10 for good behavior. He cooperates fully in the recovery of the overseas assets. "He will take it," Audrey said, not looking up from the report she was signing. "He is a coward, terrified of a trial, and Miss Reyes agreed to testify against him in exchange for immunity. A smart move. She's writing a tell-all memoir. Glitter and treason, I believe." Audrey laughed. A real, genuine laugh. Good for her. At least she finally found a way to earn her own money. Marcus handed her the last file. "And this, the divorce decree, finalized this morning. You are officially Audrey Sterling again, in every regard." Audrey took the pen. She looked at the paper that officially separated her from the man who had so badly underestimated her. She thought of the lunch at Baltazar, the cheap laughter, the cruel dismissal of her beige clothes. She signed her name, Audrey M. Sterling, with a firm, decisive stroke. She closed the folder and pushed it aside. "Thank you, Marcus." Her voice was bright. "Now, let's move on to new acquisitions. I'm thinking of moving the firm into biotech. I just read a very interesting paper." She was done looking back. The specter was gone. The queen was on the throne, and the future was hers to build. Reflection and final call to action. The final lesson. Audrey Sterling's story isn't just about a revenge dress. It's about the lethal power of being underestimated. Vincent and Nova laughed at her clothes because it was the only part of her they could see. They never bothered to look deeper. They mistook her silence for weakness, her patience for stupidity, and her kindness for a blank check. They forgot that the most dangerous person in the room is often the one who doesn't need to shout. Audrey played the long game. She wore her beige cardigan as armor, hiding the queen beneath until the perfect moment for checkmate. What did you think of Audrey's ultimate power move? Have you ever seen someone so completely underestimated? Tell us in the comments. If you love stories of justice, power, and well-deserved revenge, please like this story. Share it with someone who needs to see it, and be sure to subscribe and hit the bell so you don't miss the next story we have lined up. Thanks for reading.